At 1 a.m., the insistent pounding on my front door cut through the quiet darkness of my home like a knife. The sound echoed off the empty walls, sharp and urgent, pulling me from the chair where I'd been sitting in the dim glow of a single lamp. I hadn't been sleeping. Insomnia had been my constant shadow since my husband's passing 9 years earlier, leaving nights long and thoughts heavier than the silence around me. But no one ever came by at this hour, not without warning. 28 years as a registered nurse in the emergency room had trained me to stay calm in sudden chaos, to breathe through the adrenaline, so I approached the door carefully, heart steady despite the unexpected intrusion, my bare feet cool against the hardwood floor. Through the peephole, I saw my daughter's silhouette under the faint glow of the porch light, the yellow bulb casting long shadows across her face. Her face was streaked with tears that caught the light like wet trails, her hair disheveled and falling in tangled strands, and she was shaking uncontrollably, arms wrapped around herself as if holding everything together by force. The sight twisted something deep in my chest, a mother's instinct kicking in before my mind could catch up. I flung the door open, the cool night air rushing in with the scent of damp grass from the recent rain. "Olivia!" She collapsed into my arms without a word at first, her body heaving with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere bottomless, her tears soaking through my nightshirt. "Mom!" she finally gasped between cries, her voice raw and broken, clinging to me like she hadn't since she was small. "Ryan's gone. He took it all. Our savings, the accounts, everything. He's been setting this up for months." Her words hit me like a wave crashing cold and sudden, stealing my breath for a moment. But deep down, beneath the heartbreak for her, a quiet resolve settled in, familiar from countless ER shifts where shock gave way to action. I was devastated, my heart cracking open for my girl, but not entirely shocked. I'd sensed something off about Ryan from the moment Olivia brought him home 6 years ago. That smooth-talking real estate developer with his flashy smile and vague stories about his early career, the kind of charm that felt too polished, too effortless. I'd pushed the unease aside for her sake, but it had lingered like a low fever. "Come in, honey," I said softly, my voice steadier than I felt, guiding her inside with an arm around her trembling shoulders. The door clicked shut behind us, sealing out the night, and I led her to the couch in the living room, the familiar creak of the floorboards under our feet the only sound besides her ragged breathing. The room smelled faintly of the chamomile tea I'd brewed earlier, now cold on the coffee table. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." I sat close, rubbing slow circles on her back as she poured out her story through fresh tears, her words tumbling out in fragments between hiccups and pauses where she pressed her hands to her face. She'd come home early for a weekend visit with friends, expecting maybe a quiet evening together, only to find his closets empty, drawers pulled out like he'd rummaged in haste, his laptop gone from its usual spot on the desk. And there, on the kitchen counter, amid scattered mail, a short note in his neat handwriting. He'd met someone who truly appreciated him and was ready for a fresh start. No apologies, no explanations. When she checked their bank apps on her phone, hands shaking so badly she could barely tap the screen, every joint account was drained, zero balances staring back like accusations. Even her personal savings account, the one with the inheritance from her father that she'd kept separate, supposedly safe, was wiped clean. His office said he hadn't shown up that day, and his partner there mentioned something vague about a sudden trip abroad, voice hesitant over the phone. "I gave him access to everything, Mom," she whispered finally, her voice breaking again as she leaned into me, the weight of her head on my shoulder heavy with exhaustion. "The house payments, the investments, Dad's money that was supposed to be safe, the one thing I thought no one could touch. It's all vanished." The words hung in the air, thick with her disbelief, and I held her close, feeling the damp warmth of her tears, letting her cry it out until her sobs slowed to exhausted hiccups, her body going limp against mine. My own mind raced quietly, images of Ryan's evasive glances at family dinners, the way he'd steer conversations away from his past, but I kept my face calm, my touch gentle. Then I stood, the couch springs sighing under the shift. Stay right here. In my bedroom, tucked away in the back of my closet behind folded sweaters that smelled faintly of lavender sachets, was my old nursing scrubs from the ER days, the deep blue top with the hospital emblem faded from countless washes, the comfortable pants soft from years of wear, my stethoscope still hanging on the hook like a relic. I hadn't worn them since retiring 5 years ago, but tonight, as I pulled them on in the quiet of my room, the familiar fabric sliding over my skin brought back a rush of purpose, the weight of responsibility, the clarity that came in crises. It was like armor, reminding me who I was, someone who handled the worst moments, who assessed damage and acted fast, no hesitation. When I walked back into the living room, the soft light from the lamp casting long shadows, Olivia looked up from the couch, her red-rimmed eyes widening in confusion that momentarily pushed aside the grief. "Mom, why are you wearing your scrubs?" Her voice was small, almost childlike, and it tugged at me, a reminder of how vulnerable she felt right now. I didn't explain right away, letting the moment settle as I grabbed my phone from the side table, the screen lighting up cold in my hand. Instead, I dialed a number I'd memorized long ago, one I'd hoped never to use this way. "Stephen, it's Patricia Harper. We need to activate the plan. Yes, tonight, full measures. I'll have the papers ready for you by 8 a.m. My voice was even, professional, the ER nurse kicking in. I hung up and sat beside her again, taking her trembling hands in mine. They felt so cold, like shock had drained the warmth right out. "Olivia, listen to me. What Ryan did isn't just heartbreak, it's theft, fraud, unauthorized transfers, maybe even forgery." The words felt clinical, but necessary, grounding us both. "And I've been preparing for something like this since he pushed to put the house in both your names, always with that charming grin like it was no big deal." Her eyes widened, a flicker of betrayal mixing with the pain. "You thought he'd do this?" Her question hung there, sharp, and I felt the micro-conflict rise, the hurt of my silence clashing with the love behind it. "I suspected he might," I admitted gently, squeezing her hands, feeling the slight tremors still running through her. "Ryan matched patterns I've seen too many times in the ER, patients brought in after scams, families destroyed by trusted partners, faces pale with the same shock you're wearing now. I didn't have solid proof, just a mother's gut that wouldn't quiet, but I took steps to protect you. Quiet ones, because I knew speaking up might push you away." "What steps?" Her voice cracked, curiosity warring with resentment, her fingers tightening, then loosening in mine. "The kind that let us track him, block transfers if possible, and gather evidence for charges. Stephen's my old friend from the hospital board, but he's also a lawyer specializing in fraud cases. He knows prosecutors personally, owes me from cases we overlapped on years ago." Olivia pulled away slightly, standing up abruptly, pacing the worn rug with restless steps, her arms crossed tight like a shield. "You were spying on my husband? Planning for him to steal from me?" The accusation stung, her eyes flashing with fresh hurt, and I let it land, knowing this anger was part of the grief, a way to grasp at control. I expected the anger. It was normal, the first shield against the deeper pain, like patients lashing out at nurses before accepting the diagnosis. "No, sweetheart, I was safeguarding you, quietly, praying every night that I'd never need it, that my fears were just paranoia from too many sad stories. But now we can't waste time on blame. We have a narrow window before that money disappears forever, vanishing into places we'll never reach." She stopped pacing, staring at me, emotions flashing across her face like storm clouds, hurt deepening, denial flickering, then a slow acceptance settling as reality pressed in. "He mentioned a property deal in the Bahamas next month," she said quietly, sinking back onto the couch, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's been excited about it, talking about golden beaches and new beginnings. Offshore accounts, likely no easy extradition. Classic move for someone running. The words tasted bitter, but I kept my tone steady. I stood, the scrubs giving me that old ER authority, the fabric rustling softly, grounding me. Olivia, you have a choice right now. Fall apart or fight. I'm fighting for you. Are you with me? I held her gaze, willing her to see the strength I knew was there. Something shifted in her then, a spark hardening in her eyes, reminding me so much of her father, who never backed down from protecting what mattered, his quiet determination in the face of his illness. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater, taking a shaky breath. "Tell me what to do," she said, voice firmer, though I caught the slight waver, the vulnerability peeking through. "Everything. Logins, signed papers, any odd conversations about money that stuck with you, and brace yourself, because men like Ryan don't usually limit themselves to one lie. It might get uglier before it gets better." I led her to my study, the hallway light casting warm pools on the walls, and pulled out the folder I'd quietly built over 4 years from the locked drawer, copied statements from holiday visits when she'd left her laptop open, notes on discrepancies he'd let slip over casual dinners, a private investigator's report on his past deals that showed 2 prior relationships ending in financial ruin for the women involved, their names redacted but the patterns clear. Olivia sank into the chair beside my desk, the leather creaking softly, scanning the pages with growing horror, her fingers tracing the lines as if to make them real. The room smelled of old paper and the faint vanilla candle I'd lit earlier to chase away the loneliness. "You really thought this could happen," she murmured, voice thick, a mix of awe and lingering hurt. "I hoped I was wrong every day," I said, organizing the files for Stephen under the desk lamp's focused glow, my hands steady, though my heart ached at her pain. But after decades seeing victims in the ER, heart attacks from the stress of sudden loss, breakdowns from realizing everything was gone, I couldn't risk you becoming one. I'd lie awake some nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was overreacting, if loving you too fiercely was making me see threats where there were none, but I couldn't ignore it. The first solid evidence was the investigator's invoice dated March 12, 2022, for $4,750, detailing Ryan's aliases in previous states, cold facts on paper that now felt like vindication and tragedy all at once. "This is overwhelming," she murmured, closing the folder gently, her eyes distant, processing the weight of years I'd carried alone. A pause hung between us, the clock ticking softly in the quiet, the first hints of dawn lightening the windows. "It's just the start," I replied softly, reaching over to cover her hand with mine. "But we have hours before dawn, and we're not alone anymore." The words felt like a promise, and in that moment, as the night edged toward morning, I saw the faintest glimmer of hope flicker back into her eyes. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever felt that deep betrayal or stood strong through the unthinkable, subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like mine, and staying together means we're never truly alone. Dawn was breaking as we arrived at Stephen Brooks's office downtown, the sky shifting from deep indigo to soft pinks, the city streets still quiet except for early delivery trucks rumbling by. The modern building's glass doors reflected the rising sun, and inside the lobby smelled of fresh coffee from the security desk. Olivia had spent the night digging through emails and apps on her phone in the guest room, her face illuminated by the screen's blue glow long after I'd turned off the lights, uncovering transfers totaling over $220,000 from joint accounts and $95,000 from her inheritance fund, money in a separate account she'd never shared passwords for, or so she thought. "How did he get into my private account?" she asked again as we parked, staring at the screen in the car, her voice laced with fresh disbelief, fingers hovering as if the numbers might change if she looked away. "Phishing email disguised as a bank alert? Or he watched you type it in one of those casual moments on the couch," I suggested, the chilling possibilities from years of hearing similar stories in the ER, or installed something on your shared computer, a keylogger, subtle and silent. I'd seen it in patient stories, digital theft hidden in everyday trust, eroding lives bit by bit. In Stephen's conference room, surrounded by printouts scattered like puzzle pieces and laptops humming softly, the air-conditioned cool against our tired skin, Olivia looked drained but determined, the initial numbness giving way to a focused anger that straightened her posture. Stephen entered, tall and graying at 58, with a sharp focus from his years transitioning from corporate law to victim advocacy after his own sister fell to a scam, his footsteps quiet on the carpet. "Patricia," he nodded warmly, eyes kind behind his glasses, then turned to Olivia. "Mrs. Ellis, I'm sorry we're meeting like this." The words hung gentle, acknowledging the pain without pity. "It's Harper now, I think," she corrected quietly, then sighed, a small, sad exhale that carried the weight of unraveling a life. "Or soon will be." The correction felt like a small reclamation, and I felt a quiet pride amid the ache. He spread the documents I'd emailed overnight across the polished table, the papers rustling. Facts. Ryan Ellis, 40, real estate developer, married 5 years. Yesterday, drained accounts totaling $315,000, plus a suspicious second mortgage on your home for $150,000, taken out 4 months ago. Olivia's face paled further in the fluorescent light, her hand going to her throat. A second mortgage? I never signed that. We talked about refinancing once, but I said no. Stephen slid over a copy. The signature looked close, eerily so, but the loops on the P were off, flatter than her flowing style. Forgery, clear as day. We'll add that charge. Good news, transactions are fresh. Joint drains yesterday, inheritance transfer 2 days ago, mortgage funds shifted last week to a local bank before heading overseas. We can trace it, follow the digital breadcrumbs before they vanish. "Can we recover any?" Olivia asked, voice hopeful for the first time, leaning forward slightly, the question carrying all her fear for the future. "Most, potentially all, the recent moves," Stephen said, his confidence bolstering the room like a steady IV drip. "Patricia triggered our protocol last night. Emergency holds filed with judges I know, alerts on your credit, forensic review started at 5 a.m. The scope hit her then, and she turned to me, eyes wide. "All since 1 a.m.? You moved that fast?" The plan wasn't new, I admitted, meeting her gaze, feeling the lingering tension from earlier. We set it up 4 years ago when Ryan wanted full financial control, always framing it as protecting us. 4 years? Hurt flashed in her eyes again, raw and unguarded, her fingers twisting the tissue in her lap. "You thought my marriage would end like this and said nothing? Kept files on him behind my back?" "I hoped it wouldn't," I said softly, the words heavy with the years I'd carried that doubt alone, nights wondering if I was damaging our relationship with my suspicions. "If I'd warned you then, would you have listened, or thought I was jealous, overprotective, seeing ghosts from my ER days?" The question wasn't accusation, it was truth, and her silence, the way she looked down at her hands, was answer enough, a reflective pause that bridged the gap between us. She fell silent, the hum of the air conditioner filling the space. Stephen continued gently. "Preparation helps hugely. We've notified federal authorities, real estate fraud crosses states, and border alerts are active. No Ryan Ellis or his known associate has flown out recently." Olivia frowned, brow furrowing. "Associate? You mean the woman? The one in the note?" "His project manager, Lena Brooks, no relation, who's also missing from work, calls unanswered. But focus, we have his itinerary from your shared calendar app. Flight to Nassau tomorrow morning, 9:45 a.m. out of Atlanta." Stephen's phone buzzed then, a frozen transfer of $112,000 caught mid-wire to the Bahamas, the notification chime sharp in the quiet room. "That's a win already," he said, a small smile breaking his professional mask. "Suggests he's still stateside, rushing moves, maybe getting sloppy." Olivia pulled up the booking on her phone, fingers flying despite the exhaustion. "Connection through Charlotte. He's flying alone, it seems, no second ticket." "Our window," Stephen said, already reaching for his phone, voice energized. "Surveillance at the airport, warrant prepped." As he stepped out to coordinate calls, the door clicking softly behind him, Olivia faced me across the table, her expression a mixture of gratitude and lingering hurt, eyes searching mine in the bright room light.
I get why you kept quiet, Mom, really, I see it now, but it hurts, like you were waiting in the shadows for me to fail, for everything to crumble. I took her hand again, feeling the warmth returning slowly. I expected nothing but the best for you, always. Every file I built, every quiet check, I prayed I'd burn it someday, admitting I was wrong about him, that my instincts had failed me for once. Being right breaks my heart more than you know, but it means you're safe now, that we caught it before it was irreversible. The vulnerability in admitting that, the fear I'd carried alone, hung between us, a bridge rather than a wall. She squeezed back, tears welling but not falling this time. What next? Her voice steadier, ready. We bait him in, I said, adjusting my scrubs like armor, the fabric a comfort in the sterile room. When Ryan Ellis steps into that airport thinking he's free, with the sun on his face and escape in his grasp, he'll learn some escapes aren't that simple.